Hello and welcome to Time for Reflections. One of the great mysteries of our faith is the Holy Trinity. No matter how much we may scratch our heads, I doubt we'll be able to understand it. Not that we're meant to understand it, I suppose. This is because over the years we have treated the Holy Trinity as some sort of puzzle which we are meant to resolve, and once we do so, we gain a prize of some kind. Let's see if I can shed some light on this mystery. For years, at the time of the Old Testament, people believed in one God. Leaders like Abraham, Moses, and David believed in one living God, only one person. In those days, of course, there were other people who believed in many gods. The ancient Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, all had many gods. But if God had revealed himself to the Jews as three persons in one, and assuming they would have understood that, let's face it, we don't understand it ourselves now. But if God had revealed himself to the Jews as three persons in one, then the pagans at the time would have thought that the Jews also believed in many gods. Later on, at the time of the New Testament, the apostles, who were Jews of course, believed from childhood that there was only one person in God. That's what they had learned from the writings of the Old Testament prophets, and that's what they experienced in their lives. They saw God's hand in everything that happened. He was the God of Abraham, the God of Moses and David, the God written about in history, the God up there in heaven who gave them the moral law, the Ten Commandments, and who created everything. Then one day, these Jews met a man named Jesus. For 3 years they lived with him. They saw that he spoke with authority and conviction, and all that he said made sense. They watched how he lived and the way he related to people. He showed compassion for the sick, the destitute, and those forgotten by society. He cared for the hungry and the poor and showed kindness for everybody. When anyone was rude or insulting to him, he did not answer back in anger. He lived his life on a high moral plane, but showed sympathy and understanding for those who were stained and scarred by sin. Jesus taught the Jews about his Father, who was God, and said that he was the Son of God. One day, when he asked, "Who do you think I am?" Peter was quick to answer, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." The Jews saw Jesus perform many miracles. They saw him die and then alive again, and knew that he had conquered death and the grave. Time and again they saw him after the resurrection, spoke with him and ate with him. It was impossible for them by then to think or talk about God without thinking and talking about Jesus. They had come to know God their Father through His Son, Jesus. They had accepted Jesus as the Son of God. When Jesus was taken up to heaven after the resurrection, the disciples were distraught. What are they to do now? Their leader, whom they saw and trusted all these years, had gone. They were afraid. So they hid in houses secretly, wondering what to do next. As promised, Jesus sent His Holy Spirit, the Comforter, upon them 9 days later. Their eyes were opened and they believed. They understood that He was the third person of God. To the early disciples, the Holy Spirit was real indeed. They had experienced the power of the Holy Spirit. They received Him at Pentecost in tongues of fire, and they were able to speak to the crowds that gathered there in different languages. Peter explained to the crowd that the disciples had received God's Holy Spirit. The disciples and the early Christians now knew for certain that the one and only God they believed in, whom Abraham, Moses, and the prophets had spoken of, had sent His only Son, Jesus, to earth. Because they had met Jesus, they also knew that Jesus, the Son of God, had sent His Holy Spirit upon them, because they had experienced the Holy Spirit. To them, all this was reality. Something they had seen and experienced and understood. Not some sort of puzzle of 3 in 1, each one separate from the other. They had experienced God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity. Because the disciples had experienced the Holy Spirit, He became such a force in their lives, giving them strength to spread the good news that Jesus had taught them, enabling them to live as Jesus had lived. It was they who handed on to us this mystery that in one God there are 3 persons. Today, many people don't understand the Holy Spirit. They don't understand the Holy Trinity. Somehow, over the years, the message has been diluted, misunderstood, or perhaps deliberately confused to obfuscate the message of Christianity. But the Holy Spirit can and does descend on people today, and it does transform people's lives. If people believe, and if they ask and invite Him earnestly into their soul. Thank you very much for listening. God bless.